Dear friends of CheTV, I hope you are doing very well. I want to share with you an overview of the direct military confrontation between Israel and Iran, which is beginning to be known as the 12 Days War. This name, coined by Donald Trump, President of the United States, clearly refers to the Six-Day War of 1967, which presents a comparison we will analyze later in this video. My intention is to provide you with conceptual tools and knowledge so you can understand what is happening in the Middle East beyond the recent conflicts. Therefore, no matter when you watch this video, I trust it will be very enriching for you. I will provide a lot of information, although in a condensed and summarized way. I will describe the most salient facts of the 12 Days War. I will provide some historical perspective so you can evaluate it fairly. I will present the three axes or blocks around which Middle Eastern politics is defined today, and we will conclude by posing some questions that arise from the new situation. As always, I also appreciate if you leave your comments, likes, questions, and more. To describe the 12 Days War, we must know what political military strategy Iran followed in recent decades. The Ayatollah's regime always avoided direct confrontation because it understands that this could jeopardize its survival. On the contrary, it chose to cultivate and arm different military organizations that could fight aligned with Iranian interests but without incurring the human cost or legal responsibility. This is what in international relations are called proxies. They are actors that channel actions emanating from a center of power. Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen have been the most prominent proxies that Tehran conceived as the first ring of its defense far from its own Persian territory. Its ballistic missile program was conceived as a second ring of protection, and at the heart of the defense of the Ayatollah's regime has been the development of nuclear weapons. Considering the Iranian defensive strategy, it is appropriate to regard the 12-Day War as the final battle of the confrontation that began with the attack by Hamas on Israel on October 7, the year 2023. For almost 2 years, Iran was able to pull the strings behind the militias that responded to it, until the Israeli Defense Forces brought the fire to Persian territory with Operation Rising Lion on June 13th at 2 a.m. Of course, while the Israeli pilots took full control of the Persian airspace and dropped their bombs on carefully selected targets to destroy Iran's missile and nuclear capabilities, the failure of Tehran's defensive strategy and its international isolation became evident. During those 12 days, Hezbollah stayed on the sidelines. All the Houthi rebels could do was launch 2 missiles, and Hamas's suicidal fight in the Gaza Strip added nothing to the defense of the Iranian regime. Moreover, no country acted to defend Iran for the simple reason that no one wants the Ayatollah's regime to have nuclear weapons or long-range missiles. Regarding Israel, the voices of support were explicit in Europe, where German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that the Jewish state was carrying out a dirty job for the good of the international community. For its part, the United States ended the Israeli military operation by bombing underground installations that required special weaponry. Surely you followed this conflict on television or through other media. So I want to make clear the difference between the political and military analysis of the issue and what one can perceive from seeing the information in the media. The definition of the conflict was decided once Israel gained full air dominance. However, during the confrontation, several friends and subscribers of the channel wrote to me very worried because they saw images of Israeli buildings destroyed by missiles. Indeed, there were 61 missiles that managed to reach Israeli soil with direct hits on an oil refinery located in Haifa, at the Weizmann Institute of Science, and at the Soroka Hospital in the city of Beersheba, as well as in other residential buildings. As a result, there were a total of 28 civilians and one Israeli soldier who lost their lives, in addition to 1,150 injured. As painful as all this has been, the truth is that Israeli casualties and the overall damage were well below previous estimates. The air raid alarms worked with enough minutes of warning because each missile launch was detected while being prepared on Iranian soil. The discipline of the people of Israel and their resilience were exemplary. While people sheltered in safe places, nearly 90% of the missiles were intercepted in the air, and in the case of drones, the interception was almost complete. The key to the Israeli military campaign was the absolute dominance of its air force achieved from the start of the operation. In the end, the damage caused to Israel by the regime of the Ayatollahs, as painful as it may have been, does not represent a significant military achievement, but rather a quite limited and symbolic one. Israel, on the other hand, achieved its military objectives during the battle, severely degrading the Iranian missile and nuclear weapons program. 9 nuclear facilities were bombed during the combat, and a total of 30 high-ranking officials were eliminated by the Mossad and the Israel Defense Forces. Half of them were the main scientists of the nuclear program, while the other half were senior intelligence officers and military commanders. Among these Iranian casualties were all the supreme commanders of the Revolutionary Guards Air Force. It is also estimated that Israel destroyed about 2/3 of the missile launchers and around half of the stored ballistic missiles, in addition to other significant military facilities and arsenals. In making this assessment, it is necessary to highlight that the Israeli objectives achieved do not constitute a definitive victory. As long as the theocratic regime that aims to destroy the Jewish state persists, it remains to be seen to what extent this regime is weakened and how the people of Iran will react in the near future. In fact, while I record this video to share with you, we still see in the newspapers that Iran is resuming its nuclear activities and denying all types of inspections. I believe that those questions from friends and subscribers of the channel concerned about the course of the war based on the destruction on Israeli soil that they could see on television, the press, and websites, or that were sent to them from Israel by friends and family, are due to the difference in the type of objectives of each army and the access to information in each society. On Iranian soil, the targets hit by Israel were mainly military, which makes them secret. Additionally, the press and internet access there are very restricted. These factors result in not many images circulating that reflect the destruction caused over 12 days, during which there were at all times about 50 Israeli planes operating simultaneously without encountering significant resistance. On the contrary, the vast majority of the targets reached by Iran on Israeli soil were civilian. Additionally, in this case, journalists covered the events with wide freedom, or it was the citizens themselves who circulated videos and photos. This leads us to consider the relationship of the government with civil society in Iran and in Israel. The military conflict made evident the differences in each case. The Iranian theocracy is increasingly dependent on the use of terror for its own survival, while the Israeli democracy, even with growing challenges, has the full support of the population at crucial moments. Certain events are telling. While a good part of the Iranians who had sufficient means left Iran following the Israeli warning and the subsequent bombings, the more than 150,000 Israelis stranded abroad due to the airspace closure scrambled for available spaces to return to their homes by land and sea. While the Israeli Prime Minister and other high-ranking officials gave statements to the press and visited the locations attacked by Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei remained hidden in a bunker and sent a written message to be read on camera by a journalist. Ultimately, the goal of destroying Iran's missile and nuclear program unified Israeli society because the public found the existential threat it faced evident. On the contrary, hatred towards Israel, efforts to destroy it, and the policy followed by the Ayatollahs is resented by the majority of Iranian society, victim of growing internal repression. I don't know if you've seen this in the newspapers, but during the war, Iranian intelligence services made their presence known on the streets, intimidating the population with weapons and various measures to make it clear the dangers faced by anyone who did not respect the regime. Let's review a bit of history now, because history and religion fuel much of the conflicts in this region. If we talk about Jews and Persians, the oldest confrontation we know of is narrated in the book of Esther, which is part of the Bible or Old Testament. In the story, the grey heroine is a beautiful young Jewish woman named Esther, who became the wife of King Ahasuerus or Ahasuerus. Esther's uncle Mordecai discovered a plot against the king and helped thwart it by informing the monarch about the plans against him. For this action, when sometime later a minister of the king named Haman proposed to exterminate the Jewish people, the story concluded with the death sentence of that minister. Haman was taken to the gallows as a sign of the king's gratitude towards the Jews. It was the first time the Jewish people were saved from extermination, proposed by a Persian leader, and is remembered each year with the celebration of Purim. It is a costume party where we eat sweet pastries that resemble the pointed shape of the evil minister Haman's ears, and during which it is allowed to cheer up a bit by drinking alcohol. When they met in Moscow in the year 2017, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told this story to Russian President Vladimir Putin to make him reconsider his relations with Iran. The Russian autocrat was not impressed and disdainfully suggested to the Israeli to stop living in the past. I don't know what Putin thinks today about the story of Esther and the defeat of Haman. During the conflict, Putin asked Benjamin Netanyahu that no harm be done to the more than 200 Russian scientists cooperating with the Iranian nuclear program. The truth is that in the Middle East the past is alive and affects the social and political dynamics much more strongly than it does in America or Europe. Let's continue with some more history, getting closer in time. The confrontation between Iran and Israel has its starting point in the Iranian Revolution of 1979, which gave rise to the Islamic Republic of Iran. Since then, its supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, made anti-Americanism, anti-Zionism, and anti-Semitism the ideological fuel of his regime. The Ayatollahs have relied on hatred toward Israel to preserve themselves, but not only that. Since its foundation, their theocracy saw the expansion of Islamic radicalism in the Shia version to other countries in the region. At this point, it is important to note that Islam is one of the major monotheistic religions in the world. Millions of Muslims live in peace and wish to continue living that way. We must differentiate between Islam as a religion and the radical interpretations of it, which are promoted by individuals, organizations, and regimes that are enemies of democracy. Let us now return to what we were saying about the Islamic Republic of Iran. In 1989, Ali Khamenei succeeded Khomeini as supreme leader and continued his ideological orientation. Representatives of the Iranian government have been explicit in their goal to destroy the State of Israel for almost half a century. They even announced it at the United Nations, whose assembly lent itself to the normalization of antisemitism, applauding and greeting President Ahmadinejad, as if he were a respectable statesman. In any case, the hate speeches and the organization of an international cartoon contest to mock the genocide perpetrated by the Nazis took a back seat to the missile and nuclear program that the Islamic Republic of Iran came to build. Both programs, as we already saw, were the main target of the Israeli and American military operation. As I already mentioned, history and religion are key to understanding the Middle East, and to delve into this, it is necessary to consider the main national, ethnic, cultural, and religious divisions that are obscured every time we hear vague references to a supposed Arab-Israeli, Palestinian-Israeli, or Judeo-Arab conflict. The issue is much more complex. There are also significant differences between nation-states created very recently during the decolonization process and ancient civilizations, some of which have imperial pasts. Let's take, for example, three important regional actors: Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. Although, in each case, we refer to countries where Islam is the predominant religion, Turks, Arabs, and Persians are different ethnic groups, each with very different histories, culture, language, and national identity. At the same time, there are divisions within Islam. The main one is between Sunnis and Shiites. Shiism and Sunnism are two branches of Islam that emerged from the year 632 due to disputes over the legitimate succession of the Prophet Muhammad. Although Shiites are a minority among the world's Muslims, they are the majority group in Iran and have a very significant presence in other countries. We could continue describing the complex divisions that mark the societies of many Middle Eastern countries and divide them into religious subgroups, tribes, and family clans, but that would be too much for this video. For today's purpose, it suffices to identify three main axes or blocks around which the political dynamics are organized. Let's start with what in the narrative of the Islamic Republic of Iran was known as the axis of resistance. This refers to the bloc of radical Shiism, led by the supreme leader Ali Khamenei. This way, we can fully appreciate the regional transformations that are underway. The terrorist attack by Hamas on October 7, 2023 against Israel marked the peak of this bloc. Until then, everything seemed to be expansion and strength. Since then, everything seems to be retreat and weakness. Although Hamas belongs to the Sunni branch of Islam and is part of its corresponding radical axis, which I will talk about in a moment, it has also coordinated its actions with the radical Shiite bloc, receiving weapons and training from Iran. None of what happened on October 7th would have been possible without Iranian support. Hamas then acted as the last link in the chain with which the Islamic Republic of Iran struck the State of Israel. This chain was composed of a land route that extended from Iran to the Mediterranean, facilitating the movement of fighters and resources. As part of this chain, and based in southern Lebanon, the Shiite militia Hezbollah came to amass. Formidable arsenal and seemed to laugh at the Lebanese National Army. Hezbollah fighters achieved a high level of expertise because they fought in the Syrian civil war and later became a fundamental support for the now deposed Assad. For this reason, the Israeli intelligence operation that eliminated hundreds of Hezbollah leaders, detonating their own Vipers, and the death of their mythical leader Hassan Nasrallah, hit by Israeli aviation in his bunker, eventually sealed the fate of the Syrian regime. Although not completely destroyed, the Hezbollah militia is very weakened to the point of not intervening in defense of Iran. In southern Yemen, the Houthi rebels have jeopardized international trade, attacking and hijacking freighters in the Gulf of Aden and restricting access to the Suez Canal. The Houthis have also attacked Israel with drones and ballistic missiles supplied by Iran. It is difficult to think that the supply will continue flowing to these rebels who have not provided any protection to their supplier. There are other Shiite militias in Iraq, in Syria, and in several more countries. In the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is also part of the axis headed by Iran. I will reassess the weakening of radical Shiism towards the end of the video. Let's now move on to the axis that is beginning to emerge as its counterbalance, filling empty spaces and competing for regional influence. The axis of radical Sunnism has been consolidating since the year 2010, when the popular uprisings of the so-called Arab Spring caused more than one national government to fall or waver. The fundamental pillar of this axis is the Muslim Brotherhood, a transnational Islamist organization founded in Egypt by the cleric and intellectual Hassan al-Banna in 1928. The objective of the organization is to expel from the Middle East all elements foreign to Islam. Hamas, whose stronghold has been the Gaza Strip, is the Palestinian branch of the Brotherhood. We can also place Qatar in this radical Sunni axis, although it should be noted that it has also maintained close relations with Iran. Qatar's gas and oil have financed the Muslim Brotherhood to the detriment of moderate governments, and for this reason, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates imposed a commercial, diplomatic, and territorial blockade on them in the year 2017. It was then that its relationship with Iran helped Qatar counteract the isolation. The Al Jazeera television channel is also a significant propaganda contribution that Qatar makes to radical Sunnism. However, the actor emerging to politically lead this radical Sunni axis or bloc is Turkey, especially as its regional competitor, the Islamic Republic of Iran, weakens. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is increasingly explicit about his desires to revive the Ottoman imperial past. His neo-Ottomanism goes beyond speeches, in which he appeals to a spiritual geography. It allows him to refer to Jerusalem, Sarajevo, Gaza, Mosul, Tabriz, and Syria as if he were a sultan addressing regions of his empire. The Turkish military muscle has made its presence felt in Qatar, Libya, Somalia, and Afghanistan, and has achieved a significant victory in Syria, where the forces it supported have taken over the government. Erdogan has become increasingly anti-Israeli, despite both countries maintaining diplomatic relations, and his support for the Palestinian cause is being replaced by explicit support for the terrorist group Hamas. Let us now move on to the third axis or bloc seeking to define the political future in the Middle East. The axis of moderate Sunnism is the closest to Israel. The core of this axis or bloc is formed by Egypt and Jordan, which signed peace with Israel in 1979 and 1994 respectively. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have also made peace with the Jewish state as part of the Abraham Accords signed in the year 2020 and are part of this bloc. The name of the agreements refers to the historical link between Jews and Muslims, as according to the biblical account, Abraham is the patriarch in both cases. Saudi Arabia is also part of the moderate Sunni axis, especially since it perceived the dangers of radical Islam during the Arab Spring. Their ties with Israel have tightened in recent times, and both countries cooperate on security matters despite not having full diplomatic relations. In this bloc, that of moderate Sunnism, we can also place the majority of the Kurdish populations that inhabit different areas of the region and fight to have their own state. Having reached this point, and if you have followed this video closely, you have understood that despite the significant influence the United States and Israel may exert, the future of the Middle East depends on how the balance of power evolves between the axis of radical Shiism, radical Sunnism, and moderate Sunnism. The course of action taken by Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia will be of particular importance. Let us now consider the current situation, starting with a comparison between the Six-Day War of 1967 and the recent 12-Day War. The War of 1967 began with a surprise Israeli air attack based on thorough intelligence that destroyed enemy aircraft on the ground. Before that, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser had repeatedly threatened to throw the Jews into the sea. Up to this point, the comparison with the 12-Day War seems encouraging. However, this comparison carries a warning, because although the one in 1967 was an indisputable military victory, it wounded Arab national pride and did not produce peace or mutual recognition between the nations. On the contrary, it was that wound to Arab national pride that drove Egyptian President Anwar el-Sadat to launch the Yom Kippur War in 1973, with which he managed to put Israel between a rock and a hard place. Only after this second military conflict did peace agreements between the two countries arrive. On the other hand, the comparison hides a novel fact. In the 12 Days War, the values of Western democracy and the dogmas of Islamic radicalism have faced off. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues to face his legal issues, and his popularity hasn't changed much. For better or for worse, he is a statesman who must answer to his people and the political system of his country. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, on the other hand, stands as the supreme leader in a regime that demands no service or accountability from him, but considers him a sort of prophet. Clearly, talking about the 12 Days War raises very important questions. Regarding the Islamic Republic of Iran, the key question is to what extent the Ayatollah's theocratic regime has been weakened. Have the conditions improved for the Iranian people's protest to bring down the regime? Or should we simply expect the rearmament of the theocracy and an upcoming conflict? In any case, there is no doubt that the so-called axis of resistance driven by Shiite Islamic radicalism has emerged as the loser in the recent conflict. This is why it is worth asking what the attitude will be of the bloc of countries and organizations grouped around radical Sunnism, in which Turkey is playing an increasingly prominent role. In this sense, the decisions of the new Syrian government will also be key, as it seems to flirt between an approach to Israel and a cautious, though not belligerent, distance. And how has the war affected the moderate Sunni bloc that is at peace with Israel? Here, the question to be determined is whether Saudi Arabia will join the Abraham Accords, normalizing its relations with Israel and opening a land route that revolutionizes global trade in coordination with the United States and Europe. I told you there was a lot of information, and honestly, many topics have been left out. But well, that's the challenge of sharing quality content in a short amount of time. I hope you liked it. Don't forget to leave likes, comments, questions, and share this material with your friends and on your social networks. See you in the next YaTV video. A big hug, and until next time.